Do you really understand what it is to be Catholic? Well, good afternoon, everyone. There aren't going to be any scrolling words to this post as I just made some notes here about something I want to talk about. And all this came about yesterday on a comment on one of the videos I posted about the death penalty. And I don't want to talk about the death penalty and the specifics there. It's the comment that I want to talk about. And I've seen this comment before on other videos that I've posted. And I've seen this comment on other social media posts. And it just occurred to me um, as I was thinking about this what the question is. If you look at your device there, you'll see, do you really understand what it is to be Catholic? And that's really what I want to talk about in a rather general way here. So, as I was thinking about this, it sort of infers a certain understanding of Catholicism for a person to make such a statement. The first thing it infers is that apparently they think that Catholic doctrine or teaching can change and that a pope can just go ahead and do that. Well, actually, according to the First Vatican Council and other documents over the past 2,000 years, the Pope's ministry really is to um, defend, uphold, and propagate the deposit of faith. He's not to make changes in anything, or he shouldn't even really even try. So, for someone to say that the Catholic Church needs to come out of the Dark Ages sort of infers that the Pope can just do what he wants and just change things. Now, for someone to think that things can change, it brings up another point. Is it really? They don't really understand that Catholicism fundamentally is based on absolute truth, which is sacred scripture. Now we could talk about, I'm sure you've all gotten into conversations with Christians about what this passage means, and but for Catholics, we have a certain understanding that the church has developed through popes, theologians, doctors of the church, the early church fathers, the very earliest writings that there are, which were, made shortly after the apostles died. And in fact, I think one or two of the early church fathers actually did speak with the apostles. So, this is what um, we base our understanding of Christianity on, and what Catholicism is about, and these are absolute truths to us. So, for someone to make a statement like we need to come out of the Dark Ages, that also infers that there are no absolute truths, that things can change, and um, we need to update what we believe according to the times. In other words, there's this, I'm sure you've heard it many times that Christians are to call the world to conformity and conversion to Christ, and we are not to become part of the world, or the church is not to embrace the world in any way, because the world is the devil's kingdom, and the kingdom of God in Christianity will always be at odds with it. So let's see here. So, the concept of absolute truth, a lot of people don't seem to get that. A lot of people really welcome. I think the Pope has maybe 80 or 85% approval rating. A lot of people really welcome change, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But for right now, there's a third point I want to make, and that's if when the Pope yesterday changed the catechism, it also says that, oh well, what we believed before that must have been wrong. See, so that opens up a whole can of worms. In other words, what else could be wrong in Catholicism? What else needs to change? Um, so this line of thinking about, we need to come out of the dark ages and sort of get with it is not at all Catholic thinking. People who actually think that way, I'm going to go so far as to say they're actually not even Catholic, regardless of what they consider themselves, and whether they go to confession regularly and pray a lot or whatever. Um, this is not Christianity. I think even mainstream Christian churches believe that the Bible is absolute truth. Although we have disagreements on, you know, what Jesus meant when he said, "Behold your mother," or something like that, or "This is my body" at the Last Supper. They don't understand it the same way. Um, but to them, um, absolute truth still exists, and the Bible, anything in the Bible, any account of, let's say, King David or something Jesus said, was not only for the time in which it was said in that particular, point in time in history, but we believe, and I think all mainstream Christianity believes this, that what's in the Bible is for all of humanity for all time, up until the present, and through the future for as long as human beings are on this earth. All right, so you can't really come out of the dark ages. There are no dark ages. There are no dark ages associated with absolute truth. The truth stands forever, period. Okay, so this thing about the death penalty. I was just looking at something else, and it really gets into depth about this whole thing about the doctrine hasn't really been changed. Well, there are some comments there about the changes to the catechism are rather vague and ambiguous, and it really gets really very complicated, and but I mean, very few people are going to want to delve into it to that degree. The other problem with what's happened is that you can see in mainstream media, Pope changes Catholic doctrine, you know. As if he could do that. See, people think, oh, well, he can change what he wants, and, we'll look forward to more changes in the future. And in fact, there's a lot of talk about this just being a test case to see if he's going to be really, whether cardinals and bishops are really going to take him to task on this and really confront him, with the wording, or it's probably not so much the wording, but the end result of all these words that are being thrown around is that there seems to be some change, in the Catholic stand on the death penalty. And this understanding has stood from, early. I think it said even the church fathers agreed that God gives man the right to uh, take the take the life of another person who has committed a heinous crime. Now, people get that mixed up with, abortion. Of course, that's innocent life. And, I mean, you don't really compare these. That's comparing, apples to used cars or something. I mean, they're two very different things. Well, so, it's hard to be a Catholic. The job of a good Catholic, it's our job to call others to the unchanging truth of God in Jesus Christ. Not to um, agree with them and when we're in conversation. And, it's a hard thing to do. It's hard to be a good Catholic. It takes a lot of time. Prayer takes time. Uh, we need to go to confession and, many other things. But, um, it's just really difficult um, to, when the chips are down, to be the kind of Catholic that we really need to be. And, some people who think about, we need to come out of these dark ages, again, I'll say they don't really understand what it is to be Catholic. They really don't. So, 90% of um, women who are of childbearing age use contraception. So a lot of people are thinking, like, if the Pope sort of gets away with this, the next thing will be, he'll be making some changes there. Um, but regardless of, what the Pope has done, which is, he's made quite a few changes. Regardless of what he's done and what he will do in the future, I really am talking here specifically, getting back to what this is all about. And I'm speaking to each one of you who are going to listen to me here. Do you really understand what it is to be Catholic? Being Catholic is believing in God's absolute truths that were true for all time, for all humanity, in every situation, yesterday, today, tomorrow, and forward into the future until human beings cease to exist on this planet. So let me see if there's anything else here. Oh, I want to bring up this point here. The Pope has a popularity rating of, I think it's like 85% or something. Excuse me a minute while I cough. Okay. And you wonder why he's so popular. Well, people really welcome the kinds of changes he's making. Um, and that's, they, again, if they really understood what it was to be Catholic, they would say to themselves, well, that's not Catholicism. That's not Catholicism the way it's meant to be. Catholicism doesn't change. The Pope shouldn't be doing this. That's what they should be saying to themselves. Instead, they just like this Pope. And let's face it, the Pope says a lot of good things. He truly does. Um, of course, we're concerned about the drops of poison, and there have been many of them. There's been, if you really want to read up until what's happened till about last year or so. Remember the filial correction. If you actually read that document, it's very specific about the drops of poison. And of course, he's never really responded to any of this, and that's the way he deals with things. He doesn't want to engage, um, conservatives or Orthodox Catholics in this sort of way. So, people, they go by that. It's like, I really like this Pope. He says a lot of good things. He's making some changes that really need to be done. And people who talk this way don't really understand what it is to be Catholic. That doesn't mean that there aren't some changes that can occur. And the kinds of changes that can occur are to clarify a point that has been made before in an official document or in a dogma or a doctrine or a teaching. You can clarify it or you can expound upon it somehow, but you can't go from the Catholic Church's teaching on on capital punishment that was 2 days ago to where the Pope is, to where Catholic teaching is today. Okay, you just, that isn't allowed, and people might say, well, if it's not allowed, then why don't they do something about it? Well, you can't fire the Pope. The Pope is only answerable to God. All right, the Pope actually can do whatever he wants. Um, and popes have made mistakes before, but I believe that they've always responded to correction. And Pope Francis doesn't do that. All right. And, he walks a fine line. He doesn't do anything so obviously outrageous that the Cardinals could convene and say, and point a finger and say, you are promoting a heresy. All right. So all this is very complicated, and the Cardinals can convene and determine. I think what they have to do is determine that God has deemed the Pope a heretic, and somehow his office is taken away from him. I'm not really sure how this works, but the Cardinals can't like take a vote and say, "Well, we don't want you as Pope anymore because you're doing things that aren't Catholic and you're making your own church here and whatever." I mean, they can't do that. Now, how about how to remove a Pope? Um, I guess is probably has a lot more to do with what God does. And, up until now, God has been allowing all of this to happen. And I think there's a lot more of it in the future. It's hard telling, but the Pope's not young, but um, you know it could be something else again. Not next week, but maybe not even next month, but in a few months or whatever. So we'll have to see what happens. But again, let me just get back and make this point again. Do you really understand? I'm talking to each one of you now. Understand what it is to be a Catholic, and you really need to think about that. All right. If you really want to call yourself Catholic, then you have to believe, as Catholics believe, that absolute truth is for all time and nothing changes. It's the world that has to change, and not the church. All right. So if you support different kinds of changes, or you support communion for the remarried, or you think it's okay that people live together before marriage, or you think gay couples should be blessed, that and any number of other things. If you believe that, your conscience overrides God's absolute truth, which is really an abuse. I believe it's an abuse of the primacy of conscience. You can't put your own conscience above absolute truth. If you do that, you're not even a Christian. That's what I believe now. But I'd like for you to think about this. And, if you come to the conclusion that, yeah, I am a good Catholic and I really understand what it is to be Catholic, um, perhaps you know someone who is struggling with this and you could talk to them about it, about really what it is to be Catholic. And it's certainly not to um, support changes in doctrine or teaching in any way, regardless of how subtle they are or how well, people play with words and dress it up. Um, you know, um, I mean, you have to look at like, what was it, what is it, what has it always been, and what is this Pope trying to make it? All right. If there's a difference there, what the Pope is trying to do, you just can't support that. You have to stay with absolute truth, and that's a big part of what being a Catholic is. Well, I think I've talked enough about this for the time being, and perhaps me talking off the cup, I'll do more of that in the future. I'm not sure. I just didn't feel like writing all this out. I thought it would be easier to talk about it. So I've talked for almost 22 minutes, which I thought I was going to talk for like 6 or 7 minutes. But all right, well, enjoy your day, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye.